Hello, everybody, and welcome to Music Industry Insights Worldwide. And today I have the amazing Michelle with us. Hi, Michelle. How are you?
Hi Saskia, I'm good, thanks. Thanks so much for having me on.
Oh, thank you so much for taking your time out of your busy schedule to come and talk to us today and share your story and your views. Thank you so much. Do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and what you do?
So God, it's always such an interesting question, this one. I never know where to start from. But I guess I'd say, well, I'm from Zimbabwe. I was born in Zimbabwe, and I moved to this country when I was 4 years old. So my most formative years, or basically, the vast majority of my life has been in this country,
Yeah,
primarily in the Midlands. And so a lot of my interests and the things that I'm into are a melding of those two different kind of worlds, like the world that I grew up in
yeah,
my household, as well as being, a British person as well. Um, and and I think so my professional life,
yeah,
moving on from that to that kind of way. My background is in publicity, music publicity. I've had the privilege of working for a number of different companies. The full-time employment I had was at a record label called Secretly Group, and another PR agency called Satellite 414. I'm currently freelance and I work at my company called KP Communications is where I do most of my PR work, but I also work in education, public speaking, mentoring and mentorship coordinating. And I guess I wanted to kind of put in where I was born and where I come from, because I think that's kind of, I guess going into this conversation, we're going to sort of discuss holistically, like who I am and what I'm about, and those kinds of things kind of, filter through in that way. There is a bridge there between sort of my like background and also my life's work. So yeah.
yeah. That makes sense. Thank you so much. And you've got many different hats there, Michelle. So tell us, like, how long have you been actively doing this for? Because I met you at Keychange as an innovator,
Mhm.
right? So I know you've been
Yeah.
doing this for a while now.
So I'd say I've been doing this for about 11 years, 11,
Right.
just over 11 years. Again, primarily in publicity. I moved to London from Coventry via Sheffield,
Yeah.
where I went to university at 21. I moved to London, which was quite a big shock. Very exciting though.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
was like so excited to move to London when I was young. I love, I have found a newfound appreciation for the Midlands and the North, but it wasn't there when I was 21. So um, but I've been working in the music industry for about 11 years solidly. And there have been so many different changes within those years. And sometimes the industry just doesn't look the same as it did like 11 years. Sometimes when I kind of take my time to think about it.
yeah.
But yeah, that's how long I've been doing it, I'd say. That's the kind of I did a few internships and stuff before, but as a full-time professional, full-time long-suffering music industry professional, I think it'd
And,
be
and
about.
obviously coming from the Midlands as well, did you find that you had to move to London to get that career start and to like progress through what you've done? Did you have to?
Totally.
Yeah,
Yeah, 100%. I think it was, ultimately places like London uh will always be the kind of big sort of central areas for the music industry.
yeah,
And it just wasn't an option for me to think of it any other way. All of the jobs that I wanted, the worked in media as well at that time, you have to remember 11 years ago, there weren't even, I don't even think that there were any like big media centres outside of London, including, the BBC Leeds or Manchester and all that stuff. They hadn't really made any transitions
yeah,
out there yet.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, it was just a must do thing. I don't know if I also ever interrogated the idea of going anywhere else either. I didn't really think to myself, oh, let me see if there's any kind of career for me in Coventry or career for me in Sheffield. It kind of always was just pushing towards London. And I guess not just out of necessity, but also there's like a charm about going to London and kind of, making it, so to speak, shuttling around the underground with a coffee or something like a scene of Sex in the City. That's how I always described my life would be like. But but yeah, I think that's very different now. I think that there are opportunities outside of London a bit more.
Yeah, yeah,
It's kind of uh yeah, I mean, if you think about cost of living and things like that, I just
It's
It's kind
crazy.
of a scary time to think if you're a young person moving down to London now, even though it is the epicenter of this stuff, it's just so prohibitive.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree with you on that one. And obviously, being a Black female as well in
Mhm.
PR and all the stuff that you're doing, do you find that you're quite highly underrepresented in the roles that you do? And do you see many Black faces doing the same roles that you do?
Um, it's very, very highly underrepresented of for Black women in my positions.
Yeah,
Um, I'm so used to being oftentimes the only person in these rooms.
yeah,
I think that's partly a sort of mechanism to try to actually survive in those spaces as well. Like I've become in some ways I've become less aware that I'm the anomaly because I've kind of had to train my brain to feel as though that I do belong there.
I can get.
But then sometimes when I take a step back and I look at it, I'm like, oh, I guess there have been, to be fair, a lot of big changes. I guess the one thing that I would definitely want to see is whether this diversity that we're now seeing is going to be long-lasting change, and whether
Yeah,
or not, companies are going to put their money where their mouth is in terms of, not doing quick sort of low to mid-level diversity pushes and making sure that these people graduate to senior levels. That's the thing. I think that's the next phase in this kind of diversity schemes that we see happening. How long is this going to last, and how much equality are we going to see throughout different levels of positions in the music industry? But I think that in my position, no, there aren't that many. But on top of this, for me, I primarily work in the independent music sector and the alternative music sector, where it's very, very underrepresented. And I think that I've always had to be very confident in my own skills and confident by how I present myself. And, working in alternative, there's lots of, um, passionate uh music fans sometimes that kind of I've found try to catch you out or whether or not you know what you're talking about or not.
right.
That's
Yeah,
something that I've always had to like, prepare for and know and kind of um let them know that I have the language to speak about alternative music is something that I've always seen. I still think that I would love to see much more diversity in these spaces. I can only speak for the UK music scene, but still, I'd say it's super, super low after these 10 years.
yeah,
Oftentimes, I'm still the only person in these spaces. There
yeah,
are younger people, but again, like I said before, I'd love to see whether or not these younger people in these alternative music spaces will
yeah,
be able to sustain a career longer, as long as I have and beyond,
right.
without, having to feel as though they've have the kind of the pains and aches of having to prove themselves.
Yeah.
And yeah, so definitely underrepresented. But there is some progress. Again, I've got my eye on everyone, but there is
Yeah.
some progress.
Yeah, there is some small steps being made. I totally agree with you on that one. But I think we do have an infrastructure problem and also ensuring that talent is being funded, especially through the talent pipeline. Because I think a lot of us underrepresented groups, we don't get that funding, we don't have that backing. We generally
Mm-hmm.
come from disadvantaged backgrounds anyway and low
Mm-hmm.
class incomes, most of us, not all of us. And that also has an additional struggle on how we can progress and what we can do and what we can actually achieve, right? So had many occasions where I've been offered some amazing opportunities, but where I'm not being funded or no one's helping me and it's coming
Mm-hmm.
out of my own pocket, which it generally does for a lot of us, then
Mm-hmm.
it's very, very difficult when you're not in paid employment. And I've been doing this for quite a long time now.
Yeah.
And, even as a trans woman, I totally feel you on not seeing many of people like me in rooms and having these discussions and obviously in employment and getting paid. So it is
Mm-hmm.
a shame, but did you, through your musical education, think that you was going to see a change as that progressed? And do you think now that you're seeing more representation, more visibility, and more education around these issues?
I think that I'd say institutions have probably done the most that they've ever done before.
Yeah,
That's what I can say.
yeah,
Now, whether or not that solidly translates to a better environment for people for underrepresented backgrounds is another story. I
mm,
think it's still to be seen. I think what I can see now, I can say 100% yes, I can see much more diversity. I can definitely see a lot more interest within diversity as well. Like, you go to loads of panels and conferences, and you can see that there has definitely been a push towards talking about things around diversity and bringing in, on occasion, people that are experts within these these situations. I did have one question I want to ask actually as well, but I think that there is definitely a push for it, but I'm still not sure whether or not we can say solidly that there is going to be change made from that. So my
Mm.
question was, I was on a call the other day with the Music Education Council.
Right.
They're an organization, charity organization that specialize in music education, and they have a specific interest in educating people from diverse backgrounds and disabled backgrounds. And the woman who runs it said that she was on a panel once where they were talking about disability, and I think only one person from that panel was actually a disabled person, and they might have been the one that was actually chairing the panel. And I wanted to know whether or not that was something you'd also experienced when it came to talking about trans issues.
Thank you for asking me that question. And yes, I find that quite a lot actually. Is generally there's a panel talking on the trans topic, but there's very rarely there might be one trans person on the panel, the rest are non-binary, which is fine. But I do think we need to have that balance, and I
Yeah.
think again with trans and non-binary, a lot of the time we're grouped together and we're put
Hmm.
as one group when actually we're two separate groups under one umbrella. And I think we've still got that confusion there of okay,
Yeah.
what does it mean to be trans and what is trans and what is non-binary? So I think
Hmm.
when I started my transition, we didn't have non-binary. So it's a new thing for me as well. So
Hmm.
getting used to that and trying to support other people that might be going through that process or understanding themselves, which I think is extremely important. And we need to be diverse and representative, of
Hmm.
course. But I do think sometimes it's tokenism,
Hmm.
which is a bit of a shame as well, because then that means that they're just putting a person up there for the sake of ticking the box rather
Yeah.
than having that meaning and that purpose behind it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that is something that you can be so encouraged by the conferences that you go to, but sometimes you can feel a bit like, okay, but this might be my third or fourth conference that I've gone to that has this panel discussion in a whole year, and I don't think that I've seen, much change from the last 3 years of having these same discussions.
Yeah, yeah. I think that too, actually. We're talking about diversity and equality quite a lot, but we're not
Mm.
seeing much action. So it would be great if we had kind of an action plan of what
Mhm.
we do next and where it's going to take us. Like you said, I think that's really, really important because at the
Yeah.
moment, I think it's great to talk, it's great to educate, but we need to see the next steps and what are those next steps and how can
Mhm.
we make sure that we do succeed actually
Yeah.
at diversity and inclusion. Yeah.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. Thank you. So, what kind of challenges and barriers have you faced accessing and working in the music and entertainment industries?
I think a lot of the barriers that I've faced have come oftentimes in a more covert way. So a lot of the time it's due to pay. I
Yeah.
think that, a lot of us, but I think especially people that come from underrepresented backgrounds are chronically underpaid. I think partly this is a systemic issue from just the general structures of the music industry, but also the more like latent nefarious nature of people's belief in your skills
Yes.
that can't doesn't quite fit into a box, and you can't kind of number crunch because nobody really wants to admit that they don't think that you're like good at what you do. But
Yes.
it's a real thing that people from underrepresented backgrounds feel and are often not believed. And I think that is the one thing that is a perpetual issue that we face when it comes to the disadvantages that we face, because we can express something, but if somebody doesn't see it or you can't quantify it or number crunch it, then people might give you the cursory, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that,
Yeah.
but not realize that that in itself is like a systemic issue, as well as the kind of numbers games and I think I felt a lot of that. I think also for me, I've struggled mentally quite a lot with the pressure that comes with some of my positions as well. The To be able to be taken seriously as a woman, let alone a Black woman, is
Yeah.
to be seen as somebody with boundless strength and who can sustain throughout trials and tribulations, whether they're coming from work or external pressures. And
Yeah.
any time that you're kind of seen to be weak, then it's a time to really pounce on that. And I think for a long time I was running on fumes a lot, and I wasn't able to kind of, I mean, obviously your body and your mind eventually breaks down, so you don't have a choice but to kind of, talk about whatever issues you might have. But that's one of the difficulties that I had, because I felt like I had to balance this career and also, be the face of a lot of the discussions that we have, especially when you're usually the only Black person in alternative spaces. So there's
Okay.
people that are expecting you to show up a lot. And I was showing for many years, I was showing up for my job and I was showing up for my career, but I wasn't really showing up for myself. I wasn't really putting my own mental health kind of there at the forefront. And I think I was, there were certain things that came through the music industry, to be frank, that were happened because of the situations that I was in,
Mm.
and those things were things that I wasn't able to deal with because it was just too traumatic to deal with. So a lot of that stuff was kind of having to run on fumes, and that was a real difficult thing for me to do. Eventually, that stuff catches up with you, and you have to deal with it. But that
Yes.
is also something that that I found was a disadvantage and a barrier to probably my own success.
Oh, don't say that.
Yeah, I think I think it's sad, but I think it is, especially when you have something traumatic happen to you when you're young,
Yeah.
and you're right at a point where you're like, everything's going really well, and you're not mature enough to realize that this traumatic thing needs to be dealt with right now and in the proper way.
Yes.
So you kind of put it to the side, and then avoid all the stuff that happens around it, and you put your career first.
And just
And there's also
age.
dangers. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And there's a danger of talking up about those things. Like now we can speak about it, which is a really good thing in a
Yeah.
way.
Yes.
And there's less fears of ramifications. I think that's another thing. If something like that happens to you when you're really young,
Yeah.
you're really scared about the consequences, especially who you might be, talking about or telling on.
Yeah.
Um, I think personally, aside from, well, not aside, because obviously they're real big things, aside from the kind of things that we commonly talk about, like the structural inequality that happened with Black women,
Yeah.
it was the more personal issues that I had that resulted in my acting in defense of, these, not in defense of myself, and
It's failures.
made.
Failures.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one thing that I would say was more of a personal issue that I had to face.
Yeah. I think I get that too sometimes as well. It's sometimes the bigger picture, but it really affects you personally. And it's nothing you
Mhm.
can do because it's out of your control. But it
Yeah.
kind of trickles down, doesn't it? And I think it's
Mhm.
kind of like generational trauma too. Even,
Mhm.
that trickles down as well. So I think we've got all these different parts that we can think about. And I think a lot of people in the music industry actually do suffer from trauma or been through some kind of trauma or
Mhm.
some issue or mental health difficulty. So I think it is a place for people to be open and be themselves. But
Yeah.
again, it's very fast paced. It's very dynamic. It's very how can I put it? It's very long hours and it's very long
Yeah.
nights. So it can put a real toll on your
Yeah, and you can be replaced,
yeah click of a
That's also a massive fear that you have when you're young, or really for any age,
yeah
you get really scared about the fact that, because we have, in some ways, people look outside in and think, wow, you have such an amazing privilege of working in the music industry. And oftentimes it is a massive privilege, but it's also one of the most coveted careers that you could ever have because it's exciting. It has all of these facets to it. But for you to, you need to kind of sustain your place in it. And that's a lot of pressure to do, especially when you're going through all these other things you are going through, as well as the pressure that you have to succeed or speak up or to represent something, or the pressure that you have of being underrepresented. It's a lot. It's a lot. And the one thing that you can see, you know, is that you could potentially be replaced. And there's always that fear there.
I think that's totally true. And I really see that. I think for me, it's been one of those things where I'm going to speak up, I'm going to be honest about it. Is I think that I have to speak up and be honest about certain circumstances and situations. And if I'm not comfortable, I'm going to speak up and say,
Mhm.
because I know I might be one of the only ones that do a lot of the stuff that I do. However, I wouldn't want to see somebody else treated sometimes the ways that I've been treated on some of these talks and panels. So,
Mhm.
having that dialogue and having that understanding and explaining those things to others so they can understand it.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's also about having younger generations understand that they are seen and they're heard as well, because
Yeah.
otherwise they're going to feel isolated. And I know that feeling. So for me,
Mhm.
I'm pushing myself to try and make sure that other people feel welcome, they feel
Yeah.
heard and seen.
Yeah,
Definitely.
100%. And I think that's a really good point, because sometimes it's not always the case that people that are older than you want to be a guardian over you.
Yeah.
Sometimes they actually see you as a threat, your youth as a threat to them. And I think that the people that I've had in my life that have been my mentors, unofficial mentors that I've had, have been
Yeah.
so enthusiastic in their wanting to support, but that doesn't mean that that's everybody else's experience. And I
Mm.
certainly want to use this time in the music industry where there does seem to be room for change to make sure that we are, actively communicating and speaking with younger people in the music industry and helping them understand what it was like in the past and what it is like now and what it could be like for them and for us in the future.
Yeah.
And then to be a central people within those discussions as opposed to these discussions happening above them. Like, I don't want to necessarily see things as a generational divide. I want to
Right.
make sure all of us are in the same space when we're discussing these things because everybody has something to share from different perspective. And I think the more people, as a young person, the more people that you see that are wanting to help, the better it is that you can get a positive outcome, I think.
So,
Um, but there's been many times as well when I've had people that are older than me and just aren't interested in like
yeah.
you might even share something that was like a massive grievance and something that happened to you and they just simply don't care or they feel threatened by it or they say, pick yourself up, I had to do this, I had to go through this. And it's just like, well, just because you had to go through it doesn't mean that you should want other
Okay.
people to have to go through. It
Right.
doesn't have to be a rite of passage.
Right.
There's a real like there's a real I think it's a real sort of old school mentality, the idea of rites of passages, isn't it? Like
Yes.
it's just so, but it can be so destructive.
It is, and I think the majority of the music industry is that way actually anyway. So we are making progress, but it is still that way, and we
Mm,
are making steps in the right direction. But yeah, I think it's very patriarchal and it's very male driven and it's very white male driven actually, and
mhm.
generally older white male. So I think having that understanding of our differences and our struggles, because I've even been in rooms and spoken to some older white men that have said there is no issues with the music industry, there are no barriers, there are no issues with representation of disability, and I'm just like, seriously?
Yeah,
But it just shows that they don't see what we see, and I don't
no.
think it's generally their fault, because sometimes
Mhm.
they might see their world as inclusive and diverse, but that's their little world and they don't see anything else apart from that. Do you see what I
Yeah,
mean? For me, I
yeah.
think that a lot of the
And
time.
I think that they compare now to what the industry was like when they were coming up. So for
Yeah.
them, it's like humongously different. It's like, how could you possibly ask for anything more? Like you should have seen what it was like even
Yeah.
30 years ago, sort of thing. And they think that that's uh, proof, the proof that there's been seismic, changes. But again, there has been change, but it's hard to know whether that's sustainable. That's the kind of constant discussions that you have to have with people who are much older in these senior positions. And I think also it's it's important that the people under them, at the end of the day, some of the older white men don't necessarily have vested interest to see massive, long-lasting change because they aren't going to be in those roles anymore.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, so it's like but you still need them on side and you still need them to understand because they honestly hold the purse strings and they fund
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, that's right. And I think this is part of it. It's ensuring, because even with the key change program, I do remember
Mhm,
saying that we didn't have many males in the room. There wasn't
mhm,
many people with power in the room that we could
mhm,
influence. And I think sometimes, we
mhm,
can have these amazing projects and stuff that we do, initiatives. But if we're not
mhm,
involving everybody and getting everyone around the table, then we can
mhm,
only go so far with what we can actually achieve. Because, like
mhm,
you said, we need those people with the decision-making processes in the room and the ones
mhm,
that hold the purse strings to make the change. So for me,
mhm.
it's really, really, important that we
Yeah,
see that. Really, really important.
that's that's a really interesting point as well because I think initiatives like there has to be a I think a good breakdown of what different initiatives do in terms of bringing in to the whole.
Yeah.
So, you can have something like, initiatives that I believe are more centered around having safe spaces and kind of talking. So let's say Keychange, She Said So,
Yeah.
Power Up.
Yeah.
But then those initiatives can't live on their own because, like you say, you also need initiatives that actually seek to report onwards to the people with power.
Yeah.
Um, and and I like to think that whenever these initiatives are being discussed, at the end of it, I know Keychange has a manifesto, for example, but
Yeah.
at the end of it, at the end of it, they're kind of collating the, our feedback and our experiences and our networks to something that is much bigger than what we see as part of the schemes. So,
Yeah.
like you say, because you can have, women and non-binary people or gender expansive people in one room.
Yeah.
Um, but those, positions or those areas about kind of talking and or helping organize, in an internal way,
And sharing information.
sharing information. But like you say, that can't be the be all and end all, because
No,
at the end of the day, what's the point in sort of talking when, we have to
actually.
be
Yeah.
looking up?
Yes. And what do you think of the manifesto actually? Because I'm not actually part of that. I did I did see the manifesto, but I haven't really read it and I haven't been part of really much of that. So what were your thoughts and feelings on the manifesto 2.0?
I think it's really good. I think there's definitely progress from the last one. I think in my perspective, they've taken some of our feedback on from
Fantastic.
throughout our year.
Yeah.
Um, I think the thing with manifestos is that again, they don't live in a vacuum. So some of it is can read as though it's a bit like this is what you want to happen, this is what we pledge, this is what we want to do. And the manifesto again is not the end goal. We have to see what's going to come from that in the next year. But I do think it's promising, and I think that the people that put it together have taken time to be more aware of some of the feedback that we had. I do get that sense. Um,
Do you know what I find funny? The way I think
yeah,
we should measure success is through employability and
yeah,
how people progress through this program. Because I think it's
mhm,
great to have the initiative, great to have that representation. But what about the people? What happens to them? What are they going to do now?
mhm,
And
mhm,
ensuring that keeps going, that drive, that momentum, that
yeah,
all these great people that we've met, fantastic, so many different skills, so many
mhm,
different sets across Europe and Canada and the UK. So,
mhm,
just make sure that we keep that going and we keep in
mhm,
touch and we keep sharing information because as far as I can see it, I don't really know what the next steps are for us part
yeah,
of the program, is that just is
yeah.
that
And I think, like you said, employability is a really big metric, and
yeah,
one of the metrics that people are quite shy to actually um to actually look at, because it's the hardest one to essentially increase, isn't it?
yeah,
And so people kind of want to shy away from focusing too much on that. But that is just the honest that but with employability, you're going to get the most honest figures that you can
wow,
actually see,
right,
right? That is the be all and end all of all of
okay,
us trying to be in the industry.
yeah,
So I think many manifestos like Keychange probably have to highlight a lot more having a long-term vision and making sure that the employability metric is the one that's right at the top,
yeah.
um, rather than sort of, I don't want to say regurgitating, but going round in a wheel,
Yeah, because
constant
that's what I
wheel.
don't want to see that either. You see, I think we
Yeah.
need to move forward, so we need to have that action plan for what's coming next. So, leading on
Mhm.
to that, what would you like to see improve in the next couple of years then in the music and entertainment industries?
What I'd like to see improve. Well, absolutely, sustained diversity. I want to see people of color who deserve their positions in the industry and sustain those roles.
Yeah,
I want to make sure that the diversity is spread across over different levels of seniority as well.
yeah,
And I want to see an industry that is truly inclusive in the sense that everybody has a true inclusive and integrated. So that's to say that everybody has a true understanding of each other's experiences. So
it's important.
sometimes it can be very disarming when you feel like you're doing a panel on diversity and you're doing it to a bunch of, you know, straight white men, say, for example, and they look as though they're kind of understanding it, but you don't know for sure whether it's
Yeah,
going to come in and out of their ears or
yeah,
whether they really empathize and want to make a difference to what you're saying. So I'd love to see a truly integrated industry in that way. Um, I'd love to see more in terms of my background, I'd love to see more Black people within the alternative music spaces within the industry. There's a
yeah,
wealth of people that perform in the space, and I think I've told you, but I'm starting a new project, which is a Substack called Black Radical, which would just feature, Black performers that occupy the alternative music space, and um, the idea of it is just to highlight talent without, room for tokenism, just to celebrate the talent and not necessarily a
Amazing.
uh, commentary substack. Just want a space that, we can just have to enjoy that, because I found that it was quite difficult to sort of find artists who are Black and alternative and find ways to work within with those people in an ecosystem.
Yeah.
I oftentimes hear, Black artists say that they really want to work with more Black people within their teams, whether or not it's, a publicist and manager, but they don't seem to be able to find it. So again, I'd love to make more of a database for music industry professionals that are Black to be able to work with other Black
Yeah.
alternative musicians, because there's a massive
Yeah.
imbalance within that. Yeah, it's a huge
That's
gap. I'd love to see that. I'd love to see more visibility in that space as well.
great.
And in that space as well, I kind of see myself working in a more, I want all of my jobs that I do right now to align with that vision of trying to elevate the spaces of Black people in alternative music spaces. So any way that I can kind of contribute to that is what I think my like personal agenda is going to be in the next 5 years, because yeah, I just don't like the idea of tokenism, but also I want people to be educated by our impact within the genre. And
Yeah.
that's been, since the genre existed.
Yeah.
I really want to kind of find a way to not just write about those differences, but actually see,
Yeah.
definite change and understanding. So yeah.
Fingers crossed. I hope it all goes well for you and well done to you. I know you're always doing some great things. So if any of the
Thank you.
listeners or viewers would like to find you, Michelle, can they find you on LinkedIn or Instagram or anywhere like that if they want to connect?
Yeah, so my LinkedIn is just Michelle Kambasha, and my email would be michelle.kambasha39@gmail.com
Yeah.
for all of your inquiries.
Fantastic. And is there anything else you would like to share with us? Any major wins or successes before we go? Because we're just running out of time now.
No, I think I've shared everything, but I just wanted to say, Saskia, you are an incredible person. I love all of the work that you do. I think people don't understand just how much you do for the sheer passion of elevating your community's voices. You don't do it for to get anything back, really. You do it just for the passion, and how important it is to you. And I idolize you so much. You go through so much, and you're still doing so much work. I think you're incredible. I think everybody should know that.
Thank you so, so much. That's really touched my heart this morning. And it's absolutely lovely to see you again. I've not seen you for a little while. And just keep
I
up
know.
that amazing work. You're such a beautiful soul, such an amazing talent. And if anyone's looking for a public speaker, an educator, or anyone in the Black music alternative scene, then please do reach out to Michelle because she is amazing.
Oh, thank you.
That's all right. No worries at all. You have a lovely day and I'll speak to you
You
soon.
too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.